Democrats have to stop thinking that what the voters dream about is to be hassled. If you buy a shed at Costco, it comes with this warning. Warning, this product can expose you to wood dust. Wood dust. No kidding, which is known to the state of California to cause cancer. That's right, California thinks you're going to snort your shed. I don't want to blow Pinocchio. I just want to put the lawnmower away.
As Barack Obama once said, one of the biggest lessons he learned as president was there is no such thing as shovel-ready projects. Environmental impact statements used to be a few pages long. Now they're thousands of pages of legalistic nonsense and take an average of 4.5 years to complete, with thousands of bureaucrats filling out millions of paper forms that kill hundreds of forests to answer the question, is this good for the environment?
Bill Maher is taking direct aim at the Democrats, and this time he is not holding anything back. According to Maher, even after losing power, their policies still control everyday American life through endless regulations, failed mandates, and bloated bureaucracy. He argues the consequences did not disappear with the election results. They stayed behind, and ordinary people are still dealing with the fallout every single day. This is more than political criticism. It is a brutal takedown of the system he believes they created and left behind. So buckle up, because this breakdown pulls no punches.
California just passed a law requiring large retailers to have a non-gendered toy section. A non-gendered toy section? Isn't Ken enough? We need a law for that? You have to inject yourselves into everything? From where you can throw a frisbee to who can braid hair? This is why so many people, by the way, were triggered by COVID policies. They were already sick of rules. Regulation should be a good issue for Democrats. It's certainly one they're associated.
Maher argues that Democratic policies are still shaping everyday American life long after the party lost power. In his view, the mandates, regulations, and bureaucratic rules they pushed never really disappeared, and ordinary people are still dealing with the consequences. He says many of these policies have made life more expensive, more frustrating, and increasingly disconnected from common sense. As an example, he points to California's non-gendered toy section law, which critics see as a symbol of ideology overtaking practicality. Maher also targets crime policies that opponents claim weakened enforcement, normalized homelessness in public spaces, and reduced pressure on retail theft. His larger point is that these are not outdated political ideas sitting in the past. They are still actively shaping cities, businesses, and daily life across the country. According to Maher, this is what happens when ideology keeps driving laws long after reality has started pushing back.
The average voter would agree that banks and chemical plants and drug companies need watching. Telling a company, you can't dump the waste from your hog farm straight into the water supply. We're mostly all for that. But Democrats have become a parody of themselves, just making rules to make rules because it makes you feel like you're a better person. Making sure that everything bad never happens again, which you can never fully do. It just makes everyone else's life a drag. The Biden infrastructure bill has a provision that requires all new cars to install an alert system that goes off when you leave a baby in the back seat, which is something done only by crackheads and people who sadly, yes, do it on purpose. And after every one of us winds up bearing the cost for cars to install this alarm, you know who's going to ignore it? Crackheads and people.
What makes Maher's argument hit so hard is that he is not attacking every regulation just for the sake of being anti-government. He draws a sharp line between rules that genuinely protect people and rules that seem designed more to signal moral superiority than solve real problems. Seatbelts, food safety, and clean water laws all make sense. Nobody serious is arguing against those. But according to Maher, Democrats stopped focusing on practical solutions a long time ago and started pushing policies that sound compassionate while doing little to improve everyday life. In his view, modern politics became more about looking virtuous than delivering results. turning governance into performance and legislation into a public display of moral self-congratulation. Meanwhile, while politicians celebrated their own intentions, ordinary Americans were left dealing with higher costs, more frustration, and the real-world consequences of policies that often failed to match reality.
Sensor light is not going to fix this problem, and Democrats no longer possess the common sense to understand that not every problem in the world can be fixed with a regulation. But don't tell that to the advocacy groups who also want every future car in America to only start when the driver blows into a breathalyzer. Oh, great, my other car is a Karen.
Then Maher pushes into what he sees as the deeper illusion behind all of it. According to him, Democrats began acting as though human behavior itself could be regulated into perfection through endless mandates, restrictions, warnings, and government oversight. But Maher argues that reality does not work that way. Human nature does not suddenly change because lawmakers create another policy or add another layer of bureaucracy. People adapt, search for loopholes, ignore rules that clash with real life, and find ways around systems that feel disconnected from reality. That, in Maher's view, is the uncomfortable truth many politicians refuse to admit. You cannot legislate away every bad decision, every human flaw, or every reckless choice. At a certain point, regulation stops working with reality and starts fighting against it. And when that line is crossed, Maher argues, ordinary people are the ones left overwhelmed by the endless weight of rules, restrictions, and government control.
Democrats have to stop thinking that what the voters dream about is to be hassled. If you buy a shed at Costco, it comes with this warning. Warning, this product can expose you to wood dust. Wood dust. No kidding, which is known to the state of California to cause cancer. That's right, California thinks you're going to snort your shed. I don't want to blow Pinocchio. I just want to put the lawnmower.
From there, Maher shifts to what he presents as one of the most absurd examples in the entire monologue, California warning consumers about buying a wooden shed from Costco because of exposure to wood dust. On the surface, it may sound like a harmless safety precaution, but Maher argues it reflects a government culture so consumed by warning labels and liability language that it can no longer separate genuine danger from bureaucratic performance. His argument is not that all safety warnings are useless. Instead, he says this kind of exaggerated, context-free caution turns regulation into something people laugh at rather than respect. According to Maher, when every ordinary object comes with dramatic disclaimers, the public eventually stops taking the system seriously altogether. And once government loses that credibility, even legitimate health and safety warnings begin to sound like just another overblown lecture from officials who believe every aspect of daily life needs to come with a warning label attached.
Viewers of this program may recall my long battle to get solar power hooked up at my house. It involved this shed, which had to be built to house this solar battery. Yes, that battery needed a house to live in. And not just any house, one that had to follow the specifications of this chart. That's a real chart of the steps we had to go through to get this thing turned on.
Then Maher makes the argument personal, and that is where the criticism becomes even more effective. He describes trying to install solar power at his own home, exactly the kind of environmentally friendly project regulators claim to support. But instead of being straightforward, he says the process became a bureaucratic disaster filled with endless approvals, mounting costs, and layers of red tape that nearly buried the project altogether. According to Maher, the problem was not the technology itself, but the systems surrounding it. He doubles down with another example, saying he needed 5 separate permits just to replace a garage door. For Maher, that level of bureaucracy perfectly captures what overregulation feels like in real life. It is not efficient, practical, or compassionate. In his view, it is a system that constantly creates more delays, more expenses, and more frustration for ordinary people simply trying to handle basic, everyday tasks.
Barack Obama once said one of the biggest lessons he learned as president was there is no such thing as shovel-ready projects. Environmental impact statements used to be a few pages long. Now they're thousands of pages of legalistic nonsense and take an average of 4.5 years to complete, with thousands of bureaucrats filling out millions of paper forms that kill hundreds of forests to answer the question, is this good for the environment?
At that point, the conversation stops sounding merely frustrating and starts looking financially disastrous. Maher zooms out and asks the bigger question, what is all of this bureaucratic excess actually costing the country? In his view, every unnecessary permit, every redundant review, and every new office created to oversee another office adds more expense to a system already drowning in inefficiency. Those costs do not remain small. They pile up, multiply, and eventually turn into massive amounts of public waste. Maher argues that in some cases the bureaucracy surrounding a project becomes more expensive than the project itself, with paperwork consuming more time and money than the actual work being done. For him, that exposes one of the deepest flaws in the modern democratic approach to government. It promises efficiency, accountability, and fairness, but too often, he argues, it produces delays, rising debt, and a self-sustaining bureaucracy that keeps growing regardless of whether it actually improves people's lives.
In San Francisco, the city's so nice you'll step in poop twice. There's an area where homeless people were urinating and defecating, and it was starting to annoy the people breaking into cars. So the city tried to build a public toilet last year, but then gave up when the cost hit $1.7 million. Not $1.7 million for a public toilet system, $1.7 million for one toilet.
Then Maher delivers the example that, in his view, ties the entire argument together. San Francisco reportedly spending $1.7 million on a single public toilet. Not a massive infrastructure project or an entire public facility, one toilet. For Maher, that number perfectly captures the deeper problem with bloated bureaucracy. Government systems often present themselves as safeguards against corruption, waste, and inefficiency, promising that more oversight, more approvals, and more administrative layers will protect taxpayer money. But Maher argues the opposite frequently happens. Instead of reducing waste, bureaucracy creates more opportunities for waste to grow unnoticed inside the system itself. Instead of fixing dysfunction, it builds entire departments around managing dysfunction while consuming even more public money in the process. According to Maher, once government reaches that stage, the system is no longer truly serving the public interest. It becomes focused on preserving its own structure, expanding its own power, and sustaining itself regardless of the cost to taxpayers.
It wasn't some magic toilet that catches your phone when you drop it. So then a private company took pity on San Francisco and offered to build them their toilet for free. But after, quote, project management, construction management, architecture and engineering fees, permits, civic design review, surveys, contract preparation, and cost estimation, the free toilet was still going to cost almost $1 million. You know, if you tack on fees like that, you're not a city.
And that is where the argument stops sounding like a sharp comedy routine and starts feeling like everyday reality for millions of Californians. Maher points to the state's high-speed rail project as one of the clearest examples of massive promises collapsing under endless spending, delays, and bureaucratic dysfunction. Billions of dollars have been poured into the project over the years, yet critics argue the final results still fall far short of what was originally promised. He also points to California's wildfire problems, where opponents claim layers of regulations, approvals, and administrative delays can slow preventive action until disaster has already struck. In Maher's view, this is what happens when bureaucracy becomes so bloated that it begins obstructing the very solutions it claims to champion. At that stage, he argues, the issue is no longer simple inefficiency. It becomes a broader failure of governance with real consequences for the people living under the system every day.
It feels like San Francisco is actually proud of being impossible. Asked about the toilet, a spokesman for the Department of Public Works said, "We are a city of public input." Okay, but I'm stepping in public output. Meanwhile, the median time to get approval to build a house there is 627 days. That's 217 days longer than it took to build the Empire State Building. You need 87 permits, 15 from the Planning Commission, 26 from the Public Utilities Commission and the Fire Department, 19 from building inspectors, 17 from the Public Works, 10 related to public spaces, and 1 from a guy in a t-shirt that says Federal Boob Inspector.
By the end of the monologue, Maher's message comes through with brutal clarity. From warning labels on wooden sheds to million-dollar public toilets, from needing multiple permits for a simple garage door to massive projects that consume billions without delivering results, he argues the evidence of bureaucratic excess is impossible to ignore. In Maher's view, Democrats did not just create a handful of flawed policies. They built an entire culture centered on overregulation, endless administration, and virtue-driven policymaking that continues to shape American life long after they lost power. He believes the system began confusing complexity with competence, paperwork with progress, and moral signaling with real-world results. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans are left dealing with the costs, delays, and frustrations that come with it. That is why Maher's criticism resonates so strongly with many viewers. At a certain point, he suggests calling out dysfunction matters more than defending the political side responsible for creating it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.